Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
While most visitors to the national park system view the parks as incredibly beautiful places, or places rich in culture and history, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes within the parks and with the National Park Service. This is Lynn Riddick, your host at the National Parks Traveler. Traveler editor Kurt Repanshek has closely followed the parks and the Park Service for more than 18 years. Over that time span, he's seen a lot of changes in the park and the agency itself. In today's show, we're going to offer a kind of state of the parks report with you. After all, as much as you enjoy the park system, you have a vested interest in their oversight and management. I'll be back in a moment with Kurt.
Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. You can show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org.
Hi, Kurt. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good, Lynn, although it's kind of strange to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak.
Great to have you there.
Glad we could get together to talk about this because, the state of the parks, you don't hear too much about it too often. It's just a constant news flow throughout the year, and I think it's good to take a pause and kind of look back over some pressing issues that have come up because, as you said in the introduction, the parks belong to the American public, and they really deserve to know how the parks are being managed so they can decide whether they think it's a great job that the National Park Service is doing or whether they have some concerns about what the National Park Service is doing.
Well, let's get going with some of the issues. The first one, let's talk about what's happening at Valles Caldera National Preserve.
That's a really interesting situation. Last fall, Chuck Sams, the director of the National Park Service, basically gave his okay to the Yemes Pueblo to go into Valles Caldera and take an eagle. Take means kill, either a bald eagle or a golden eagle. And it was kind of strange in the way he did it because it was quietly done. There was no public hearing on the proposal. It moved through the Park Service pretty quickly. If you watch the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process for issues in the Park Service, usually those are months-long, drawn-out processes. And that wasn't the case in this situation. All of a sudden, we had this decision come up before it was announced that the Park Service was looking into it, or at least most of us didn't know about it. And what's wrong with that is a number of retired Park Service personnel pointed out that this is totally against Park Service policy. In fact, in the congressional record, while it allows tribes to come in and take fish or wildlife, or not wildlife, but plants for ceremonial or religious purposes, it prohibits them from specifically taking wildlife. And unless the Parks Foundation statement allows for that. And that wasn't the case in this situation from what I've been told. And so we've got the Park Service director almost unilaterally deciding that the Yemes Pueblo can come in and take a bald eagle or a golden eagle from Valles Caldera. And there's great concern that not only does this go against Park Service policy, but that it could be precedent setting. What if some tribes want to go into Yellowstone and take bison? They could point down to Valles Caldera and said, well, it was allowed there. Why can't we do it here?
And what is the issue with the desire to take the bald or golden eagles?
As far as I know, it would ceremonial. practices. I don't know exactly what it is. That wasn't mentioned, beyond ceremonial uses of the bald eagle or the golden eagle. So I'm not exactly sure what they did. But if you're familiar with Valles Caldera, it's surrounded by national forest. And you would think that there's plenty of places in the national forest where they could take a bald or a golden eagle. Why it had to be in Valles Caldera, I'm assuming that, the MS Pueblo's ties to that landscape go back millennia. Nevertheless, from what I've been told, the tribe had no previous right to go in and take wildlife from the preserve.
And did you mention where this preserve is? What state?
It's in northern New Mexico. It's right adjacent to Bandelier National Monument, not too far from Santa Fe. Recently, a number of retired Park Service wildlife biologists and superintendents wrote to Interior Secretary Deb Haaland and saying this was egregious and she should put a stop to it and see that never happens again. The letter pointed out that, quote, any treaty rights for tribes to take eagles, the Supreme Court ruled in 1986, were supplanted by the Golden Eagle Protection Act, and except where specifically and explicitly provided for in a Park Enabling Act, requests by Indian tribes or others to take eagles, living or dead, is in clear violation of National Park Service rules, unless a legislative remedy to this matter is enacted. So it's going to be curious to see where this goes, if it's one and done or if it does set a precedent and we see other tribes coming forward to seek similar permissions in other national parks.
Yeah, it seems like that pushback from that list of heavy hitters is significant, but how likely would it be for the director to sort of change his decision?
It's a done deal. The tribe went in there in November, I think, and took the eagles. Whether or not there are recurring requests remains to be seen. I would think that it could spur a lawsuit if there is another request. I don't know. A lot of concern out there about wildlife in national parks and what's allowed and what isn't allowed.
I wonder how you take an eagle. Do you shoot it? Do you trap it?
That's a good question, Lynn. I'm not sure exactly what the tribe did in this situation. I couldn't say.
Yeah, it's ironic because it took this country so long to build back up our population of bald eagles. This doesn't seem like something that would take out a whole lot of them. I don't know. I don't know what numbers. I don't know, what kind of ceremonial things are done. But it is a little ironic given how far we've come from being on the brink of having those species wiped out.
Yeah, and I don't think that it was a population-threatening situation. It was more, these are national park lands. These are what the rules allow in national park lands, and these what rules specifically do not allow. So I think that's the gist of it. I do. There is some question about whether enough research had been done to say what impact it would have on eagle populations in northern New Mexico. It didn't, from what I read, didn't have any strong conclusion on that. It didn't seem to tilt the population one way or the other. But again, it's the precedent of allowing a tribe to do this when the rules specifically say it shouldn't be done.
Yeah, it's definitely a slippery slope. Well, what can you tell us, moving on, about the director's decision to disband the National Leadership Council? Tell us what that is and what's going on with that.
That's a good question. The National Leadership Council is basically made up of regional Park Service directors, associate regional directors, and SES level, which is senior executive service superintendents. And they would get together in Washington throughout the year to basically talk about issues across the national park system with the Park Service director. And back in January, Director Sams disbanded this. There was no reason given. There was no public announcement of it. I heard about it through my channels in the parks. And it was a real head scratcher. I tried to get Washington to explain why he got rid of the National Leadership Council and what his plan was for moving forward. Certainly, you would think being able to sit down with your regional officials and superintendents from across the country and just talk to find out what issues are going on out there, what decisions they're having to make, and just generally management policy and management initiatives would be very helpful for the director who's based in Washington, D.C. and certainly doesn't have the time to go out and visit all 430 some units of the National Park System. I reached out to former Park Service Director John Jarvis, who was the Park Service Director through the Obama administration, and he had told me that from anonymous sources, he had heard that Chuck Sams had talked to his predecessors, and they told him that the National Leadership Council was an ineffective decision-making body. Well, John told me that he doesn't know which predecessors Chuck Sams talked to, but he never reached out to John Jarvis himself. John said if he had, he would have told him that the National Leadership Council was not designed nor intended to be a decision-making body, because it's just a group that is too large to help make decisions, but rather it's a deliberative body, a place to hear from the field and discuss the top issues across the park system and debate the merits and the downsides if possible, and come to some conclusions that can guide decisions by the director. As I mentioned, you think all that information flow would be very helpful to have. As John Jarvis told me, this type of gathering gave voice to park leaders who were dealing with issues like climate change, concessions, visitation, maintenance backlog, fires, housing, morale, etc. Now that he has disbanded, said Mr. Jarvis, Director Sams and his deputy director, Frank Lands, neither of whom have National Park Service experience, will be making decisions without any field input. That, John Jarvis told me, is a problem.
Are there any other ways for folks out in the parks, the directors out in the parks, to sort of give any feedback in a collective sense?
Not that I'm aware of. I know issues that arise in individual parks and individual regions do make their way back to Washington, but in terms of having that kind of collective gathering where you can sit down with your regional directors and your top level superintendents and discuss issues and find out whether they're isolated issues or whether they're issues across the national park system, I think would be very valuable. And the fact that we can't find out from Washington why Director Sams disbanded this council and whether he had any better idea for getting that feedback, it's kind of disturbing. And that's one thing that's really concerned me since the Biden administration took over and Director Sams was appointed. There's very little transparency about what's going on. The Eagle case in Valles Caldera was a perfect example of that. I mean, the NEPA process seemed to have been circumvented. I mean, they said that there was no public discussion because the timetable was too quick, that they had to get this approval in time for the ceremony. It seems like the tail is driving the dog in that situation. And, why disband the National Leadership Council and not explain that reason, the rationale behind it, is also kind of concerning. Maybe not to the general public, but certainly you would think to the Park Service community as a whole.
Yeah, and I wonder too, you said you really don't know why that hasn't been said, whether it's an ineffective body or if it's, monetarily, related. It'd be nice to know for sure. Or if, like you say, there's a plan for something else to come to sort of do the same thing in a better way.
Yeah, you have to wonder. I mean, we're in March. This administration could be out of here in less than a year. Why disband the Leadership Council now? It seems like you've got a short timeline to try and get something else up and running, if that's your intent.
All right. Well, talk about the current appropriations bill. That's not good news for the parks necessarily, is it?
It's really shocking that the national park system is held so highly in regard by the American public. I think the National Park System, the National Park Service, is ranked number 2 behind the U.S. Postal Service in terms of agencies that Americans admire. And the Park Service for such a long time has been running in trouble because it doesn't have the resources financially or staffing wise to get by. We've seen that just recently with, last summer at the Blue Ridge Parkway, they shut down a campground 2 months ahead of schedule because they didn't have the staff to manage it. Just recently at North Cascades National Park Complex, the decision was made that they don't have the resources to staff permanent rangers at Stehegan, which is a relatively remote area of the park, a highly popular but remote area. You have to take a ferry boat to get there or hike in. A very popular area, and the Park Service says, well, we just can't base permanent rangers there. And if they can't base permanent rangers there, they can't have seasonal rangers there or volunteers because there's no one to supervise them. So it's a tough one. The community out there at North Cascades has recently written a letter to Deb Haaland, Interior Secretary, asking her to order the Park Service to make sure that they staff Stehegan. Against those two examples, we come up earlier this past week with funding bills passed by the Senate and House Appropriations Committees for Interior Department and other federal agencies. And they carry about $150 million cut to the Park Service budget. We're talking an agency that already is struggling to get by, and they're going to have to deal with another cut, $150 million. And because it's for fiscal 24, which actually started last October 1st, they're going to have to figure out how to swallow that $150 million cut in roughly 6 months. Until fiscal 25 kicks in October. At the same time, last year, there was a federal pay raise of 5.2% approved, but there was no money for parks to pay for that pay raise. And so superintendents have had to look at their existing operations and decide how they're going to have to come up with the money to cover that pay raise. I've been trying to get some information from superintendents on how they're doing it. So far, I haven't been able to find any really good information on that, but it can't be good. You have to think about all the employees out there and what a 5.2% pay raise means. I mean, we're talking tens of millions of dollars. Maybe close to $95 million that the Park Service has to figure out how to cover just for the pay raises. And now we've got this additional $150 million cut to the current budget. It's a sad way for the parks and the Park Service to be managed.
Yeah, it's kind of going in the opposite direction from where we need to head. Because you have covered and we've talked quite a bit about shortage of staffing, shortage of housing, Park Service personnel in the park spread way too thin. And this doesn't seem to be answering any of those problems.
No, and it wasn't too many years ago when Congress under President Trump passed the Great American Outdoors Act that President Trump signed into law, which funneled, I think it was $1.3 billion a year, total maybe $6.5 billion over a 5-year period, into the park system to try and address the maintenance backlog. Now, this $150 million cut also represents a cut of roughly $71 million into the Park Service's maintenance and construction budget lines.
Even that had already been assigned from the Great American Outdoors Act?
Well, that President Biden had requested in his fiscal 24 budget proposal. But, we're going backwards, and you have to appreciate that just because the money is appropriated by Congress under the Great American Outdoors Act, that doesn't necessarily mean that the parks have the staff to manage that money or to get the work done.
And so what would be the latest with all of that? There's a budget proposal due this month, correct? From the administration?
President Biden's budget proposal is due on Monday, March 11th. And as you and I both know, Lynn, from our many, many, many years of covering politics, it's dead on arrival. It's sad but true that we are in such a divided country politically that we can't agree on some of the basic issues that need to be done. And at the same time, we have to appreciate that, yes, the country has a staggering budget deficit, and we've got to bring that we have to reduce that. How you do that, what type of budget cuts you make, I don't know. But again, there was a tax legislation overhaul back in 2017 that really reduced the tax load for businesses and Americans across the country, and I think that probably played a role in some of the budget deficit going forward. If you're out there and you pay attention to the news feed on your phone or your iPad or whatever, in the newspapers, you've probably seen a lot of stories lately that you should be preparing now for your tax bill in 2026, because that's when these tax reductions passed in 2017 will roll off the books, and we'll be back to the old ways. And it might be good. I mean, it'll be hard for Americans probably, but we got to cover our bills somehow or another.
Let's talk about some of the good stuff that's happening, some of the positive things. There is a big gift for employee housing at Yellowstone. Tell us about that.
That really was a huge gift, and it's kind of sad that it was an anonymous gift, because it'd be great to thank those donors who gave it. But back in 2020, I think it was, Yellowstone Superintendent Cam Shawley really started working on getting new employee housing, and he was able to get millions of dollars through the Interior Department to build new employee housing. And it was a start. It was a step in the right direction. The news just recently, the National Park Foundation had worked with the National Park Service, and they found donors who are willing to put up $40 million for Yellowstone employee housing. And, that's got to be a big win-win for Park Service employees in Yellowstone. They haven't announced exactly where this housing is going to be. I think the first wave of new housing back in 2020 went into the Mammoth area at park headquarters, but you've got many other areas. You've got Canyon, you've got the Old Faithful complex, you've got Lake. There's plenty of places where employees could certainly use new and improved housing, and it'll be great to see that stuff done. What'll be interesting to see is whether that money flow starts spreading around the national park system, because certainly there are other parks where employees certainly could use new housing. I know Rocky Mountain National Park has a dire situation there. They lost a lot of employee housing a couple of years ago when the East Troublesome fire came through and actually burned it up. At Acadia National Park, they also have had a deficit of employee housing, and Friends of Acadia has been a great champion in both providing actual housing for Park Service employees as well as obtaining land where housing can be built. But that's just a number of parks. I mean, you look at Grand Teton National Park. I mean, the joke about Jackson, Wyoming is that the billionaires have pushed all the millionaires out of the area. And so you can just imagine what housing costs in Jackson, Wyoming are, and how Park Service employees who are not paid the best can afford a place to live.
Well, back to the housing and the $40 million gift for Yellowstone. Is that going to be for brand new housing, or will some of the existing housing be renovated? Do we know? And did that money go directly to the Park Service, or is it through a friends group?
Lynn, it's going to be a mix. They're going to bring in some new modular units. I mean, if anybody wants to go to the Traveler website and search for Yellowstone housing, there are some nice pictures up there of some of the new housing that has gone in, as well as some pictures of the dilapidated housing that was removed. But the new $40 million gift will pay for new modular housing, as well as it's going to go into some renovation of some of the housing in the park that really needs it. But yeah, Lynn, the new $40 million is expected to pay for more than 70 modular units that will be spread across the Yellowstone Park where it's most needed. And I believe some of the money also will be used to do some restoration work in some of the existing housing that isn't too far gone. As I understand it, the money is going directly to the Park Service to pay for the work.
I see. Talk a little bit about this $195 million going into climate change work. Is that part of the infrastructure bill?
It's actually part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's funny, ironic funny, when you're talking about a reduction act that so much money is coming out of it. But it's a nice, huge chunk of money, nearly $200 million, that is targeted to be spent over the next decade on climate change restoration, adaptation, and resilience projects. And, if you go to the Park Service website and look at these projects, I mean, it's incredible what they're using it for. It ranges from investigating how vulnerable fish species in eastern national parks are to climate change, as well as restoring coastal marsh systems in parks in the northeastern corner of the United States, as well as developing treatments for cultural resources threatened by wildfires in the Northwest, and even developing conservation plans for bison in a dozen national parks. Just the other day I saw a story out of Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument in Maine, and I never really connected Katahdin Woods National Monument with the Atlantic Ocean, but the Penobscot River flows more than 100 miles from the coast up into rivers, tributaries in Katahdin Woods, and they just announced the other day that they're going to be spending a chunk of money to improve habitat for endangered Atlantic salmon. And when I talk about improving habitat, it's mainly, opening up some of the tributaries, replacing culverts that have collapsed or need to be bigger, that sort of thing. But that's just one example of, some of the good that's being done in terms of dealing with climate change impacts. It'd be good to see, the endangered Atlantic salmon build larger populations and expand their reach. I mean, once upon a time, I understand every river north of the Hudson River had Atlantic salmon coming in to lay their eggs. The female salmon would come in the fall and lay their eggs, and over the winter, the eggs would hatch in the springtime, and that's where the population would build. And that's been reduced to just rivers in Maine and some in Canada now, and it'd be great to see that expand eventually. But it's good to see money being spent on these types of projects. But, to look at some of the other projects, if regular readers and listeners of National Parks Traveler probably are aware of the problem in Hawaii with the threatened extinction of some of the endemic forest birds, because mosquitoes are carrying malaria up to these birds. And some of this money is going to work to try and derail the mosquitoes' reproduction systems. Some of the money is going to manage abandoned mine lands, some in Mojave National Preserve. Some is going to prioritize coral health and resilience to climate change in the southeast region. These are all very exciting projects, and how successful they'll be, I'm not really sure. It's just definitely something to watch and be excited about and hope for the best, because it'd be great to see these ecosystems revived and restored. And it's for recreation purposes too. Anglers, they'd love to go out there and be able to fish for Atlantic salmon someday down the road. But certainly, it's an exciting time, I think, in terms of dealing with climate change and not sticking our collective head in the sand and saying it's not happening and we're not going to do anything about it.
This is Lynn Riddick, and I'll be back with Kurt Repanshek after this short break.
National Parks Traveler has launched the National Parks RVing Guide, the definitive guide for RVers seeking information on campgrounds in the National Park system. The guide is now available free through the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. If you're a traveler who wants to explore the national park system, you'll want this app. The guide is packed with details for campgrounds in more than 70 national parks across the country, searchable by park, state, or region. You'll also find feeds of the traveler's content, including our latest stories and podcasts. Download the National Parks RVing Guide and start planning your next trip today. Embrace the perks of an Interior Federal membership, where our benefits can save you up to $2,800 a year. Take advantage of discounts on insurance like auto, home, and AD&D. Shop for travel deals. Get a discount on password security and identity theft protection too. Discover all Interior Federal has to offer. Learn more and apply at interiorfcu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
And I'm back now with Kurt Repanshek. Tell us a little bit about the Spruce Tree House at Mesa Verde National Park.
That's one of the popular cliff dwellings that for many, many years, you could walk into it and you didn't need a ranger to take you into it. You could tour it on your own, and a very popular cliff dwelling that people would go to. And back in 2015, it was shut down because it was built into an alcove in the ridge line there, and part of the alcove was starting to spall and fall off, and it became a safety problem. And for the past 9 years, it's been closed to the public. I mean, you could view it from afar, but you couldn't walk through it. And the Park Service just recently announced they've come up with a stabilization plan that they're going to implement later this year. And hopefully, once that is done, Spruce Tree House will be reopened to the public, and just another great interpretive site to understand how these ancient cultures lived in the Southwest thousands of years ago.
And I wonder how you stabilize something on the side of a cliff so that you keep it natural, so that you adhere to the naturalness of this structure.
That's going to be something that's certainly interesting to see how they do that, because I've seen areas in the West when you drive along interstate highways and, where they go to retain rock walls from collapsing. They've actually got kind of like a chain linking on the side of a hillside to keep the hillside from sending rocks down onto the highway. So I'm not exactly sure what the final appearance will look like, whether they will resort to some sort of chain fencing system to hold the rocks onto the roof of the alcove, the ceiling of the alcove. But, they're talking about installing up to 75 20-foot-long rock bolts in a net-like pattern. So does that mean there's going to be a net in there? I don't know. I didn't see any graphics that would show what it might look like. They do say they're going to use a custom-colored mortar that will match the color and the texture of the surrounding sandstone. So, maybe that'll hide whatever techniques they use in terms of the rock bolts, and whether they have to do any netting, so to speak. It's going to be interesting. At the end of the day, I think it's encouraging that they've figured out a way to not just reopen Spruce Tree House, but preserve it for future generations to marvel at.
So this Spruce Tree House, again, is an alcove on the face of a cliff. Any idea how many visitors can be in there at once?
No. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many Cliff Palace can hold. I know they take tours through there, and I don't know if there's 20 or 25 per tour, but yeah, I can't tell you.
So anyway, that's been closed since 2015. So I guess it would be exciting to have that open again.
It really is. And, if you've ever been to Mesa Verde, it's just a fascinating place. Balcony house, I climbed up into it. I'll never forget that experience. It's something that you have to experience for yourself. You climb up these wooden ladders into this cliff dwelling. Some really interesting rooms there. You have to squeeze through some passageways. It's a very, very memorable experience. Of course, Cliff Palace is the main attraction there, and everybody wants to go to Cliff Palace. And it's really amazing what these people did so many centuries ago to make a living and to survive in this harsh landscape. The dwellings are just fascinating, and I marvel at them every time I go there.
Speaking of reopening things, the reopening of the Bluffs Lodge on the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Yeah, that's it's not definitely going to reopen. It's been closed for I think since 2010, when the last concessionaire that operated there withdrew. They didn't want to renew their contract. The reason being that it's not the biggest property. I forget. I think it's got 24 guest rooms, and so you can imagine, 24 guest rooms. You're not going to make a ton of money. And it was an old facility. It opened back in 1949, but since it's been closed since 2010, it's been a really sad story of neglect and deterioration. And as I understand it, there's some really nasty mold inside the lodge. But it's been a very popular place. I mean, people would go there and talk about how their grandparents visited and stayed at Bluffs Lodge. There's not a lot of lodging along the Blue Ridge Parkway, and to be able to possibly reopen this iconic property to end the day there and sit out on the back porch and watch the sunset sink over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I'm all for it. Right now, the Park Service is just asking, if there's any interest out there, if anybody would be interested in coming in there and reopening it. Related with this situation at the Bluffs Lodge, the Park Service is also curious about the Rocky Knob cabins if somebody wants to be a concessionaire there. And it's only got 7 guest cabins. So, in these days of going to these huge, huge lodges with hundreds and hundreds of rooms, or going on a cruise ship with, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of rooms, some of the bigger cruise ships, to be able to kind of go back in time to some of these smaller properties where at the end of the day, it really does settle down and it's quiet and peaceful and you can really relax. I think it's a great thing the Park Service is trying to do. I just hope that, somebody can come up with the money to take on that challenge.
Is the Bluffs Lodge Virginia or North Carolina along the Parkway?
It's in North Carolina. It's milepost 241 in North Carolina. And what's really interesting is adjacent to the Bluffs Lodge or Caddy Corner is the Bluffs Restaurant. And this has been a wonderful success story. I mean, it's, again, another iconic stop along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation came to the restaurant's rescue because, again, it was in a state of somewhat decay. And the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation was able to raise some millions of dollars to restore it. And now it's a beautiful facility. They put a new roof on it. They refreshed the interior to the way it looked with the checkerboard flooring. There's swivel chairs at the counter where you could sit and have your cup of coffee and a piece of pie. It's been a really, really popular place. It opened also in 1949 and was one of only 4 restaurants that ever opened on the Parkway. It too had closed in 2020, and thankfully the Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation was able to raise money to open it back up, to restore it and open it back up. So, if somehow the Bluffs Lodge could be restored and brought back into business, that would be a great win for park visitors.
Sure. I'm sure there'd be a big demand to stay there too.
Absolutely. Whether it's financially feasible, I don't know. But, Lynn, you and I have some spare time. Maybe we should, go into business.
Good idea. Well, something else that's going on that's interesting is Mammoth Cave National Park and the shark situation there.
It really is fascinating. I mean, I've been to Mammoth Cave a couple times, and I never was told about any sharks there. I went on a wild cave tour, squeezed my way through various passageways with the light on my helmet. I know you've been there. I'm not sure if you went on the wild cave tour, but do you recall hearing anything about sharks?
Shark fossils.
You did when you visited?
I did.
Wow.
And that was a surprise to me because you don't normally think of, the mountains of Kentucky having sharks at one point in them, but We were all under the ocean at some point in time.
Yeah, yeah, we really were. And when you visit Mammoth Cave, you're under a bunch of rock. You don't think that there were things that used to swim on this landscape, but I guess it's true. 325 million years or so ago, there were quite a few sharks in this ancient seaway that existed at the time, and as you mentioned, covered up Kentucky and Virginia and whatnot. And it was just a couple of years ago when one of the park employees sent pictures of some fossils to Vince Santucci, who is the top paleontologist in the National Park System, and he runs the Park Service Paleontology program. And he was really intrigued by these fossils, and he shared them with another paleontologist, John Paul Hodnett, who was captivated by this, and he had never worked underground on paleontological puzzles. But he went off to Mammoth Cave, and they found more than 70 species of sharks in 25 different locations in that 400-mile long cave. Just an incredible story, and just goes to show you how truly diverse the National Park System is. You never realize what you might run into.
What else is going on?
There's some developing stories, Lynn, that have come up in recent days that we're still working on. But in February, the Park Service announced in Crater Lake National Park that it was totally unhappy with the concessionaire there, that the concessionaire was not doing a good job living up to the terms of the contract in terms of maintaining the facilities, Crater Lake Lodge, and some other lodging facilities in the park, as well as some safety issues had come up. And so in a very rare instance, the Park Service terminated that contract, and we're just getting a new concessionaire coming in. Explore US is the name of the company, and they, I believe, descended from a previous concessionaire, Ortega, that had operations in a number of parks. And so Explore US just announced this past week that they're taking over the Crater Lake contract, and they're planning to come in and, as they say, have a seamless transition. They're going to live up to all reservations and deposits for future stays. And it's good to see that if it is smoothless transition, it'll be great to see that it is smoothless, because Crater Lake is a very, very popular national park destination, and the Crater Lake Lodge is a fascinating historic building perched on the rim over the lake. Just a beautiful operation. Sad to see that the previous concessionaire wasn't doing such a good job, but great to see that the Park Service has quickly come in and found somebody to take over for that. Looking at the same corner of the country up in Olympic National Park at Kalaloch, people might be familiar with Kalaloch Lodge, and adjacent to the lodge is a number of cabins, and some of those cabins are right on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's a gorgeous location. You get these wonderful sunsets. It's great for storm watching. Unfortunately, erosion happens, and beginning this coming week, they've got a contractor coming in who's going to have to tear down 10 of the cabins because they're too close to the bluff for safety. I mean, they're within 15 or 16 feet, and hate to see erosion take down cabins with somebody staying in them. But the Park Service is going to be removing those cabins, and it'll be curious to see if they decide to replace them somehow, some way. Another sad situation, Lynn, I know we're trying to talk about positives, but another sad situation is at Sequoia National Park, where Crystal Cave will remain closed this year. And that's because of repairs and maintenance work that have to be done in relation to damage caused by the K&P complex wildfire that burned through Sequoia National Park back in 2021, as well as the brutally hard 2023 winter. Those two things did a lot of damage to the roads and trails there, and there's some hazardous dead standing trees near the cave that have to be taken out. The road has to be repaired and whatnot, and so they announced just recently that the cave will not be open to visitors this year, And the National Park Service has some wonderful caves to explore if you like going underground and you're not too bothered by claustrophobia. But certainly Mammoth Cave is the icon, the crown jewel of the caves in the National Park System. But you've got Wind Cave up in Wind Cave National Park, Jewel Cave, certainly Crystal Cave is a nice one down there at Sequoia National Park. I love caves. I love to go into them. I know when I was working for the Associated Press, I got a private tour of this cave up in northern Wyoming on the Montana border. It wasn't open commercially. And I got a BLM guide or BLM ranger to take me down into it. And the underworld is just fascinating. I'm not sure what you think about it, Lynn. Do you get claustrophobia?
Not at all. And now that you know that you can see shark fossils or that shark fossils exist, that's even more of a reason to go do your underground cave exploring.
Absolutely. Because you never know what you'll see. There was a situation at Badlands National Park a decade or so ago where a young girl spotted a fossilized skull of a saber-toothed tiger. So, when you're out there in the parks, keep your eyes open. You never know what you'll come across.
Well, Kurt, thank you for updating us on all these issues, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm sure you will stay on top of all these and keep us posted as you always have.
Thanks, Lynn. It's been fun, and hopefully it's only up from here.
And that's our show for this week. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget, your tax dollars and entrance fees go to support the parks, and you should know how they're being managed. If you have concerns with that management or how Congress funds the park, reach out to your congressional delegation with your concerns. For The Traveler, this is Lynn Riddick.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.